I'm here with Chris Thompson, founder of Kickballs for Kids.
Actually also the president and vice president and CEO and financial manager, secretary, and I do some of the janitor stuff.
It's very impressive. What inspired you to start Kickballs for Kids?
Back in the winter of 2010, I was going through kind of a rough patch in my life, and not many people knew this about me then or even know it about me now, but it actually got so bad that I was at a point where I lived in an apartment at 666 St. James Street, and there were nights where I'd look over the edge of the balcony and think that I didn't want to be here anymore. And one night I was at my lowest of lows, and I wrote a goodbye letter to my family and cleaned my apartment so that no one would have to when I was gone. And then I got a phone call from a friend that I went to university with, asked me if I wanted to go to Africa with him. I had no reason not to, so I booked a plane ticket 2 days later, gave up my job and my apartment, and was on a plane to Africa by the end of the week. No agenda, no plans, didn't research anything, but when I was there, I saw an opportunity to give back to a sport and a continent that gave me a new lease on life.
What was it specifically that you saw that inspired you to start the charity in the way that it's run?
I couldn't turn my head without seeing a field filled with kids kicking anything that would roll, whether it's a pop bottle or a ball made of bags or rags or even a coconut. And as much as I loved soccer, I couldn't imagine playing under those conditions. So it just so happened that while I was in Africa, I missed my niece and nephew's birthdays. Zach was turning 5, Chloe was turning 7, and I wrote a letter to them explaining the conditions of the countries that I was visiting and how the average salary is less than $1 per day. And so I asked if they'd mind me buying them their birthday presents in Africa and giving them to kids in Africa. And they were cool with it, so I bought 2 soccer balls, and it just snowballed from there.
While you were there, roughly how many soccer balls did you hand out and over what period of time?
Well, I only booked a one-way ticket to Africa because I didn't plan on coming back. I thought I was going to spend all my life savings and then just disappear. But as the funds started coming in and emails started coming in and it got a bit of media attention, I set a goal to hand deliver 1,000 soccer balls. So the trip ended up being about 5 months, which is when I spent the last penny on the last ball that I delivered. But it wasn't just soccer balls, it was anything that people wanted me to pick up. So it was some volleyball stuff. I get letters from old ladies that said, "Oh, I remember skipping rope as a kid and how much fun that was. Would you be able to find skipping ropes?" So I'd be buying skipping ropes and delivering those to girls over there, or shirts or anything that might make a difference in someone's life.
On that initial trip, how many countries did you travel to?
It would have been 10. Started in Egypt and finished in South Africa.
When your trip first started and you landed in Egypt, is that when you were first inspired for the idea for Kickballs for Kids?
Not initially. There was inspiration all along the way, but the project started in Tanzania about 3 weeks into my trip, which coincided with my nieces and nephews' birthdays. And then also at that point I was thinking about how important sport was to me all my life and how soccer and basketball were like my therapy. So when I was having a tough time, I could step onto the basketball court or I could step onto a soccer field and my problems would disappear. But when I hit my lowest point that winter, I had damaged my knee and I couldn't play basketball and I couldn't play soccer. So without that outlet, without that therapy, I was miserable. So I started thinking, if other people are going through that, something similar, there was my chance to try to give back.
Chris, what's the mission of Kickballs for Kids?
When I started the project, the motto was and still is, share sport, spread joy. And that was the goal. Sports have brought me joy all my life, so I wanted to spread that. And I also wanted it to be more than just a handout. Like, I didn't want to give money. If you give money to a beggar, all you've done is make them a successful beggar. But by sharing sport and providing sports and viable sports programs in schools, it's pretty far-reaching. a child that owns a soccer ball isn't going to play by him or herself. So that ball will be shared by, dozens. If it's put into schools, it'll reach hundreds. And the happiness, there's a certain joy you get from sports that can't be found anywhere else. And it's been proven that when you're happy, you live longer, you have better mental health, you have more success at school, more success at work, better relationships. So that's the goal, and that's the goal moving forward.
During your time both in Canada and Africa, there have to be some pretty poignant or powerful moments. Could you touch on a couple of those?
Sure. I tried to photograph the recipient of every ball that I handed out. So I've got over 1,000 photos, and each photo has its own story or memory. But I guess the first two balls that I delivered, one was to a group of kids playing on the side of the road with a coconut as a ball and with girls as goalposts. So I figured a nice soft soccer ball would be a definite improvement for everyone involved. The second ball I delivered was the first point at which I realized I couldn't stop. We were driving down the highway in a bus, and in the distance I saw a school with a playground that had probably 1,000 kids and not a single toy. I couldn't imagine phys ed or recess without sports equipment, so I struggled to get the bus window down, fired this soccer ball out, it whizzed across the windshield of an oncoming vehicle and landed right in the center of this playground. And I'll never forget the sound of 1,000 kids rushing for a single soccer ball. And I think the first point at which I realized that what I was doing was actually important was this little guy I met in Rwanda who was a street kid, and street kids are quite unlike other children, as they're forced to fend for themselves. They're stripped of their innocence in childhood. And this little guy was about 8 or 9 years old, and his broken French and my broken understanding of French, I learned of his tale. He said, "Je n'ai pas une mère, elle est morte, je porte autour de ses vêtements." I don't have a mother, she's dead. I carry around her clothes. And he was wearing a lady's hat, a lady's scarf, a white dress, and yellow high heels. And so I couldn't dream of a child in more need of some happiness. So asked him to wait for me, ran back to my hostel for a ball, gave it to him. He smiled for the first time that I'd seen. He thanked me 10 times over, and he kissed the ball, and then he tried to give it back to me. And he didn't even realize that it was for him to keep, but he was that happy just to touch a real soccer ball. And that one's stayed with me for 8 years, and I often think if there was other ways I could have helped him. I could have given him money, which would have been spent in a couple of days. I could have given him a meal, which would have been in and out of his system in a day or two. There wasn't a way I could take him off the streets or change his immediate life situation, but by providing him with sports, I got to see him at least have happiness, because I watched him for about 15 minutes as he played with the ball, the whole time smiling, the whole time still holding onto his mom's clothes.
So after traveling in Africa for 5 months, you returned to Canada. During your time in Africa, you were primarily receiving donations from Canadians and then using those funds to help people that you met on your travels. And so what happened when you returned to Canada?
I was invigorated by everything that happened over there. Like, by the end of the trip, I got into World Cup games on VIP passes. I was hanging out with the Mandelas, and I was getting stories from both the people that I met there and people back home in Canada. Like, it wasn't just donations coming from Canada. The smallest donation was 50 cents, and the largest was $1,170 that came from a school in Kuwait that heard about the project. So the reach of it was just mind-blowing. And then coming back to Canada, I had a number of opportunities and doors that opened to me and the project, and most importantly were the opportunities to speak at schools. So I had a school contact me and asked if I could go and tell them my story, and from there I've probably spoken at about 40 different schools, and that's what's helped to give the project legs and keep it going.
And so in what way, other than the message that you've been given to these students, in what way have the schools been involved in your work?
I never wanted to be rich old Canada helping poor old Africa. Like I wanted it to be a two-way street where, yes, we can help people in third world countries, but the kids in Canada or students in Canada can learn as well. So I think the best thing to come from the project has been the K for K Brother Sister School project, where I'll go and speak at a school in Canada and tell them about my journey. If they want to get involved, they come up with their own fundraising ideas. Whatever money they raise, I send to a school in Africa. And whenever I contact a school that I'm looking to support, I ask for a wish list. If your school could have anything, what would it be? And time and again, it comes back. Number 1, soccer balls. Number 2, cleats and uniforms. Number 3, better drinking water. Number 4, food. So these schools are putting sports above food and water. So once we make the connection through sports, and we have, say, the Selkirk Royals in Manitoba and the Kampala Royals in Uganda, you've got a permanent connection. And then once their sporting needs are taken care of, we can look at other areas that they might need some help too.
Chris, can you tell me about the relationships established between Canadian schools and some of the schools in Africa?
Sure. I've been able to connect 9 schools here in Manitoba to schools in Africa. And I think 2 of the coolest ones would be GS and Gemma School in Cameroon, where Bobby Ben School in Stonewall, they're little fundraising superstars. The first round of support we sent got the school in Cameroon, of course, new uniforms and cleats and soccer equipment. And then after that, once the connection was made, the next item on their wish list was a new schoolhouse that didn't have a thatched roof and mud floor. So we were able to provide enough funds to build a new school that had permanent roof, permanent floor. Stonewall Collegiate was connected to Gwirindindi School in Zimbabwe. And after outfitting all 4 of their sports teams, we also provided the first ever laptop the school's ever owned. And it was such an important event for the community that a government ceremony was held. 500 villagers showed up to witness the delivery of the sports equipment, and it was broadcast on Zimbabwe's national TV news station. And then after that, the second round of support we sent was $2,500 that went towards the first ever Kickballs for Kids scholarships that ensured that some students that might not have been able to afford the $50 a year tuition could continue their education. And a 3rd and 4th year of funds were sent over to provide more scholarships.
That's amazing. After you introduce a school in Canada and make the connection with the school in Africa, what is your role after that?
Ideally, I'd like to be able to step away. As far as sustainability goes, I would like to be the one that introduces the schools, makes the connection, maybe helps them get the first round of support over, and then I can step away and those 2 schools are connected permanently, hopefully.